Hey there, welcome back to our little corner of history. Tonight, we travel deep into the jungles of time, into a world swallowed by vines, silence, and secrets. A world that once shimmered with temples, calendars, mathematics, and gods who demanded both beauty and blood. The Maya. A civilization that flourished for over 2,000 years, and then, almost overnight, vanished. Before we begin, take a deep breath, maybe dim your lights, and let the hum of the night around you blend into the story. And if you enjoy drifting off to tales that make the past feel alive, go ahead and subscribe. It means a lot, and it helps these forgotten voices echo just a little longer. Now, close your eyes if you can. Imagine this. It's the 9th century after Christ. The air is thick with the scent of rain and stone. You stand before a pyramid that rises above the jungle canopy, its limestone steps gleaming under the sun like the bones of some sleeping god. Around you, the city of Tikal hums with life, markets alive with color, incense curling through temple courtyards, the sound of drums echoing across the plazas. In this moment, the Maya are at their height. Their cities stretch from the Yucatan Peninsula down through Guatemala, Belize, Honduras, and El Salvador. Each city a rival kingdom, ruled by kings who claimed descent from divine serpents or celestial jaguars. Their scribes record history on stelae, tall stone slabs covered in elegant glyphs that seem almost to breathe when the light hits them. Their astronomers track the heavens with an accuracy that would humble modern scientists. Their architects carve entire mountains into pyramids. Their farmers coax life from the stubborn soil with systems of terraces, canals, and raised fields that turn swamps into gardens.
This is not a primitive people. This is genius rooted in ritual, civilization woven with time itself. The Maya don't just count days, they speak with them. To them, time isn't a line, but a living cycle, turning endlessly like the gears of the cosmos. And every day, every offering, every drop of blood feeds that turning. Yet, even as their temples reached toward the sky, something beneath began to crack. When we look back now, it's hard not to see the Maya world as a mystery waiting to be solved, a riddle written in stone and swallowed by vines. The great cities, Tikal, Copan, Palenque, Calakmul, all abandoned within a few generations. No signs of foreign invasion, no great fire or flood to mark the end, just silence. What happened? For over a century, archaeologists, climatologists, and epigraphers have chased that question. And the deeper they dig, the stranger the answer becomes. Because the fall of the Maya wasn't one thing, it was everything. Let's step back, though, to when everything still worked, to when the rain still fell, the kings still ruled, and the gods still listened. The classic period of the Maya civilization, roughly 250 to 900 after Christ, was an age of brilliance. Across the lowlands, more than 40 major cities thrived, each with palaces, plazas, observatories, and ball courts where ritual games decided not only honor, but fate. Population estimates suggest up to 10 million people lived within the Maya world, a patchwork of alliances and rivalries. Power shifted constantly. When Tikal rose, Calakmul schemed. When Palenque glowed with art and poetry, its neighbors watched with envy. Wars were fought not for land, but for prestige, captives, and the right to be favored by the gods.
The Maya king was more than a ruler. He was a living axis between heaven and earth. His blood, spilled in ritual, was believed to feed the universe itself. But even divine kings are human, and humans need rain. The Maya lowlands depend on seasonal rainfall. Rivers here vanish underground, swallowed by limestone caverns. Cities thrived by collecting rainwater in vast reservoirs and cisterns. When the rains failed, famine followed swiftly. And starting around the year 750, the rains began to falter. The evidence lies buried in the sediments of ancient lakes. Scientists have taken core samples and found layers that tell the story. Years when the water dropped, when the dust blew thicker, when drought became more than a bad season. It became a pattern. Between 800 and 900 after Christ, the climate shifted violently. Mega droughts gripped the region for decades at a time. But drought alone doesn't topple a civilization that has endured for centuries. What made this different was timing. By the 8th century, the Maya were already stretched thin. Their kings demanded more monuments, more wars, more sacrifices. The forests around the great cities were cut for building and fuel. Soil eroded, crops failed. The balance between the earth, the people, and their gods, so central to Maya life, began to tilt. Inscriptions from this period change in tone. Earlier stelae celebrate victory, dynasties, and cosmic order. Later ones grow desperate, fragmented. Battles multiply, captives increase. Rulers boast of war after war, but the joy seems hollow, forced, as if the blood no longer satisfied the gods. Archaeologists have found evidence that suggests entire cities turned on each other. Fortified walls appear where there were none before. Royal palaces are burned, monuments defaced. The alliance networks that once connected the Maya fractured into chaos. Imagine living in that world, where the sky refuses to rain, the crops wither, the rulers bleed themselves in vain, and the gods stay silent. It must have felt like the end of time. By the early 9th century, city after city fell quiet. Tikal, once home to tens of thousands, was abandoned. Its temples stood empty, the jungle creeping up the steps like a slow green tide. Inscriptions stopped, the carving of history ceased. It was as if an entire people decided to stop speaking to the world. And yet, the Maya didn't vanish entirely. This is the haunting part of the story. They didn't disappear overnight in the sense of extinction. They moved, they adapted. The great cities of the south were left behind, yes, but the people themselves migrated northward, into the Yucatan, where new centers like Chichen Itza would rise centuries later. The collapse of the classic Maya was the fall of kingdoms, not of culture. Still, for the archaeologists walking through the ruins of Pitan or Belize today, it feels like walking through a pause in time. The plazas are overgrown but still perfect. The temples still rise from the canopy like islands in a green sea. The echoes of footsteps, of laughter, of prayers, they're all there if you listen. Some scientists argue the final blow wasn't just drought or warfare, but the very success of the Maya themselves. A system so intricate, so dependent on the divine cycle, that when one part broke, everything followed. Their calendars were among the most advanced on Earth. Their hieroglyphs, complex, poetic, alive. Their mathematics included the concept of zero long before Europe rediscovered it. But what they couldn't calculate was collapse. There's a haunting irony in that. A people who measured time to perfection could not stop their own clock from running out. The fall of the Maya wasn't an apocalypse, it was an unraveling, a slow, quiet withdrawal from grandeur into survival. But to those who lived through it, as the rains stopped and the cities turned to ghost towns, it must have felt sudden, overnight. Imagine being one of them, waking up in the city your ancestors built, watching the priests climb the temple steps to plead with the sky, and knowing that the gods are not answering, that everything, the rituals, the wars, the stone monuments, is no longer enough. That's how civilizations die, not in fire, but in silence. But that's only the beginning of the mystery, because centuries later, when the Spanish arrived, they found the Maya still alive, scattered, diminished, but still writing,
still calculating, still carrying the flame of a vanished empire. So how did this great civilization endure its own disappearance? What happened in those lost centuries between the jungle's embrace and the arrival of the conquistadors? That's where we're headed next. When the jungle finally took back the cities, it did so with tenderness. It crept slowly, leaf by leaf, vine by vine, wrapping around temples like a shroud woven by time. Roots split stone. Birds nested where priests once chanted. The voices that once echoed through the plazas were replaced by the low hum of cicadas, the whisper of wind through crumbling doorways. But silence doesn't mean absence. The Maya didn't vanish into myth. They dissolved into the landscape that had always been both their cradle and their test. Let's imagine one of them, a woman living through those uncertain years. Her city, once full of music and markets, now feels hollow. The sacred wells run low. Her children no longer play near the plaza. The rituals are shorter, whispered. The king hasn't been seen for months. Rumors spread like smoke. Another city burned, another ruler gone. At night, she listens to the forest reclaim what was once theirs, and she wonders if the gods have moved on. What we call collapse might have felt, to her, like slow forgetting. Across the southern lowlands, this forgetting spread. Families packed what they could carry, maize seeds, clay idols, fragments of carved bone, and followed ancient paths northward, toward regions where the rains still fell. They carried with them not just belongings, but beliefs, stories, songs. This migration wasn't a single event. It was a movement stretched across generations. Villages became smaller, kings less powerful, cities more scattered. But the Maya heartbeat continued, steady beneath the soil. Archaeologists can still trace it. Pottery styles that shift but never disappear. Glyphs that evolve but retain familiar roots. Even as the palaces crumbled, people were still making art, planting corn, and honoring the sacred cycles of time. They were adapting, quietly, patiently. And in the north, new cities rose. Chichen Itza, Uxmal, Mayapan, names that sound like spells whispered in the jungle. These weren't mere survivors, they were rebirths. Their architecture carried echoes of the old world, but with new shapes, new gods, new trade routes. Chichen Itza especially stood apart. Its great pyramid, El Castillo, was more than a monument. It was a calendar carved in stone. Each of its 4 staircases held 91 steps, totaling 364, and the top platform made 365, one for each day of the solar year. Twice a year, during the equinox, the setting sun casts a shadow that slithers down the steps, forming the shape of a serpent. To the Maya, this wasn't coincidence. It was communication, a moment when heaven and earth spoke the same language again. From the ruins of drought and chaos, they built a new center of power. Chichen Itza became a hub of trade, drawing merchants from across Mesoamerica, from the Gulf Coast to the highlands of Guatemala. Its markets thrived with obsidian, jade, cacao, feathers, and copper bells. The old gods were still honored, but they now shared altars with new influences, especially from the Toltecs of central Mexico. This was the Maya Renaissance, shorter, less stable, but dazzling while it lasted. If you walk through Chichen Itza today, it still feels alive. The echoes cling to the stones. The Temple of the Warriors, rows of carved columns depicting soldiers in plumed helmets. The great ball court, where the sound of a voice can travel from one end to the other as if carried by unseen spirits. And of course, the sacred cenote, a vast natural sinkhole where offerings were cast into the water to honor Chalk, the rain god. When archaeologists dredged its depths, they found gold, jade, incense burners, and bones. Young ones mostly. Sacrifice didn't vanish with the drought, it deepened.
When the rains came late, the people prayed harder, offering what they valued most, life itself. It's difficult for modern minds to grasp this world. To us, rain is weather. To them, it was the breath of creation. To live in the Maya world was to live in constant dialogue with the divine. Every harvest, every illness, every star overhead was part of a cosmic conversation. But even the rebirth had limits. By the 1200s, Chichen Itza's power began to fade, just as others had before it. Internal rivalries, shifting alliances, and perhaps, again, the slow cruelty of climate began to pull it apart. Mayapan rose in its place, a confederation of smaller city-states that tried to hold the fragments of unity together. And then, in a familiar rhythm, it too fell. By the time the first Spanish sails appeared on the horizon in the early 16th century, the grand age of Maya cities had long passed. The jungle had reclaimed its crowns. The people still lived, in villages, in hills, in forests, but their old gods had grown quiet. Imagine what it must have felt like when strange men in iron armor stepped ashore, speaking a language that sounded like thunder and carrying weapons that spat fire. To the descendants of the Maya, these were not conquerors, at least not at first. They were omens, visitors from another age, perhaps sent by gods whose names had been forgotten. But the omens turned to chains. The Spanish conquest of the Yucatan was slower than in other parts of the Americas. The jungle protected the Maya. The heat, the swamps, the guerrilla resistance all made invasion costly. The Spaniards fought not a single empire, but hundreds of small communities, each with its own rulers, gods, and grievances. It took nearly 2 centuries for them to claim full control. And yet, even under the weight of conquest, the Maya spirit endured. Missionaries burned their codices, those precious books of bark paper covered in hieroglyphs, calling them works of the devil. Only 4 survived. 4 out of thousands. And still, the Maya memory refused to die. Because memory for them was never just ink and paper. It was woven into ceremony, spoken in language, lived in the planting of corn, the rhythm of drums, the weaving of patterns that mirrored the stars. In remote villages, elders kept the calendar alive, hidden beneath Catholic names and saints. Festivals timed with equinoxes, prayers whispered in the same cadence that once honored Chak and Ixchel, the gods of rain and fertility. Their temples might have crumbled, but their cosmos never did. It's humbling, isn't it, to realize that while we speak of their collapse, they might simply call it transformation. The Maya world didn't end. It folded in on itself, like a star contracting before it shines anew. Modern descendants of the Maya, millions of them, still live across Guatemala, Belize, Mexico, and Honduras. They speak over 30 distinct languages, each carrying echoes of the ancient tongue that once filled the courts of Tikal. They still honor the corn, the rain, the cycles of time. The empire vanished, the people did not. But still, one question lingers, and it keeps archaeologists awake at night. Why did the fall feel so sudden? How could a civilization so sophisticated, so deeply rooted in its environment and spirituality, unravel in what seems like the blink of an eye? The clues, it turns out, are buried not just in ruins or texts, but in the very chemistry of the earth itself. And to find them, we have to dig deeper, into caves, into lakes, into the bones of those who lived through the end. Because the story of the Maya isn't only about how they lived. It's about how the world they built, a world of gods, kings, and calendars, turned against them. That's where we're going next. Picture this. You are standing at the mouth of a cave in Belize. The air is heavy with the scent of earth and stone, and the temperature drops as you step inside. The beam of your flashlight glides across glittering stalactites, each one formed by centuries of dripping water. Slow,
patient, eternal. This is Aktun Tunichil Muknal, the cave of the Crystal Maiden, one of the most sacred places of the ancient Maya world. To the Maya, caves were portals, gateways to the underworld, the womb of the earth, the place where rain and life itself were born. They believed the gods lived beneath the surface, and when drought came, this was where you went to speak to them. Modern archaeologists have followed in their footsteps, though their prayers are made of science. They enter not to offer sacrifice, but to listen, to read what the stone remembers. Drip by drip, over centuries, the water that forms stalactites and stalagmites traps within it tiny traces of the atmosphere, like fossils of the sky. Scientists call these cave formations climate archives. By analyzing the oxygen isotopes in each layer, they can reconstruct the patterns of rainfall over thousands of years. And what those patterns show is chilling. Around the year 820 after Christ, the water's chemical fingerprint changes dramatically. The isotopic ratios indicate an abrupt, severe decline in rainfall, not for a year or two, but for decades. Then a brief recovery, then another collapse. By 860, the droughts had returned, even worse than before. Some lasted 15 to 20 years. In certain regions, rainfall dropped by more than 50%. To live through that in the Maya lowlands, where rivers vanish underground and water must be stored, was to live on the edge of thirst. But the caves tell another story too. Archaeologists found offerings scattered across the chamber floors: pottery, jade beads, obsidian blades, and bones. Human bones. Many of them belonged to children. They were not the victims of war, but of ritual. The Maya, desperate for rain, returned to the womb of the earth, pleading with the gods who had grown silent. The most haunting of all is the body of a young girl, her bones now fused with the cave's crystals, the Crystal Maiden. Her final moment became eternal, glimmering in the flashlight beams of modern explorers. It's easy to shudder at such rituals, but think for a moment about what they mean. To the Maya, sacrifice was not cruelty, it was balance, life offered to sustain life. The drought was not just weather, it was a cosmic imbalance. The gods had turned their faces away, and only the most sacred gift, human blood, could restore harmony. But harmony never returned. When the rains failed, the crops failed, and when the crops failed, kings fell. The Maya political system, so dependent on divine legitimacy, began to implode. A ruler who could not summon rain was a ruler who had lost the favor of the gods. Epigraphers, experts in Maya hieroglyphs, have traced this unraveling. At first, the stelae show kings performing the sacred bloodletting rituals, drawing lines across their skin with obsidian blades, offering their own pain as prayer. But as the droughts deepened, the carvings grow frantic. They show wars, captives, and desperate rituals in which entire families participated. In one site, Dos Pilas, the royal lineage ends abruptly. The final inscriptions stop mid-sentence, as if the scribe simply walked away. The end didn't come like a storm. It came like a whisper. Archaeologists have found evidence that some cities were abandoned suddenly, food left uneaten, tools dropped mid-use. Others were left more slowly, each generation watching the jungle grow closer, the plazas quieter. But the droughts were only part of the story. There was another invisible killer, the soil. For centuries, the Maya had cleared forests to build their cities, to make lime plaster for their temples, and to feed their enormous populations. Without trees, the thin tropical topsoil eroded quickly. Rain, when it came, washed it away. The fields that once fed thousands turned to dust. Pollen samples taken from ancient lake beds show a clear pattern, a sharp drop in forest pollen replaced by grass and weeds, the telltale signs of deforestation. When the environment failed, famine followed.
Skeletons from this period show signs of malnutrition, thin bones, lesions from vitamin deficiencies, stunted growth. You can almost feel the despair in those bones. And yet, even as their world collapsed, the Maya refused to stop believing. Deep in the Petén region, at the site of Caracal, archaeologists uncovered a layer of ashes covering the last structures, temples, homes, even altars. The city had been burned intentionally, not by invaders, but by its own inhabitants. A ritual ending. The people, it seems, were closing their own story, not surrendering to outsiders, but returning their city to the earth. It's a haunting gesture, almost poetic. A civilization built on the balance between man and nature, choosing, in its final act, to yield back to the jungle. The jungle accepted. When Spanish chroniclers first heard stories of the Maya, centuries later, they were told that the forest itself had grown jealous, that the gods had taken back their creations, that the cities were still alive, hidden under the trees, waiting for the right moment to return. And, in a strange way, that turned out to be true. Because now, in the 21st century, satellites and LiDAR scans, lasers beamed from the sky, have revealed that beneath the canopy, the Maya never truly disappeared. What was once thought to be wilderness turns out to be geometry. Roads, canals, terraces, causeways, and entire cities still linked together by ancient trade routes. In 2018, scientists announced a discovery that stunned the world. Over 60,000 previously unknown structures buried under the Guatemalan jungle. Temples, homes, watchtowers, even defensive walls, all hidden beneath centuries of green. The network was so vast that it forced historians to rethink everything they knew. The Maya weren't a handful of isolated city-states, they were an interconnected civilization, dense, organized, and massive. And that makes their disappearance even more haunting. How does a civilization that vast, that intelligent, that resourceful just stop? Some researchers now believe the very success of their system doomed them. A web so finely balanced that once disrupted by drought, war, and overpopulation, it collapsed under its own weight. Others think diseases played a role, tropical illnesses spreading faster as water grew scarce. Still others point to rebellion, peasants rising against divine kings who could no longer deliver divine results. Each theory adds another thread, but none can fully untangle the mystery. Perhaps that's fitting. The Maya lived by cycles, by mysteries, by the understanding that not everything is meant to be known. As you walk through the ruins today, say through the towering temples of Tikal at sunrise, you feel that truth. The mist rolls through the courtyards like ghostly breath. Howler monkeys roar from the treetops, their cries echoing like ancient horns. The stones are cold, but they hum faintly, as if remembering. You realize that the Maya didn't build for us, they built for eternity. And eternity for them never ended. Their descendants still mark time in the same sacred rhythms. Their language still carries the names of the gods. The maize still grows, the rain still falls, the calendar still turns. The civilization fell, but the cosmos they built kept moving. Perhaps that's the lesson buried in all this, that civilizations are not destroyed by a single disaster, but by 1,000 small silences. A missed rain, a failed harvest, a prayer that goes unanswered. A city that grows too proud. Until one morning, someone wakes up, and the plaza is empty, and the jungle hums with the quiet triumph of patience. So yes, maybe the Maya civilization did disappear overnight, but only because, to the gods of time, one night is 1,000 years long. Still, one question lingers. If the Maya mastered time, if they could predict eclipses and track Venus to the day, did they foresee their own ending?
Did they know the cycle would turn against them? Next time, we'll descend deeper into their sacred calendars, into the mathematics, the astronomy, and the prophecy that shaped their world. Because to understand why the Maya vanished, we have to understand how they saw time itself. And time, in their eyes, was alive. The night sky above the jungles of the Yucatan is the same one the Maya watched more than 1,000 years ago. If you could stand beside one of their astronomers, say on the summit of a temple in Copan or Palenque, you'd see him seated cross-legged on a stone platform, a simple bowl of water before him reflecting the stars. Around him, the jungle hums, alive but reverent. The night is thick with heat and sound, yet he is utterly still. His eyes track a single point of light moving across the heavens, Venus. To the Maya, Venus was not just a planet. It was an omen, a warrior, a god with moods and cycles, whose rising and setting foretold the rhythms of war, kingship, and sacrifice. They mapped it with astonishing precision, predicting its movements centuries in advance, without telescopes, without metal, without the modern tools we take for granted. All they had were their eyes, their minds, and a sky that never lied. For the Maya, the universe wasn't chaos, it was clockwork. Every celestial event had meaning. Every day was part of a vast turning wheel. They didn't believe in linear time, the kind we live by, where there's a beginning, a middle, and an end. To them, time was circular, alive, repeating like the seasons or the heartbeat of the earth. Every cycle mirrored another. The birth of a child echoed the birth of the sun. The rise of a kingdom foreshadowed its fall. And so, when the Maya civilization began to crumble, they did not see it as an apocalypse. They saw it as an inevitable turn of the wheel. Their calendar system, often misunderstood by modern minds, was not about predicting the end of the world. It was about marking its renewal. You've probably heard of the date, December 21, 2012, the supposed Maya doomsday. For years, it fueled documentaries, panic, even Hollywood blockbusters with exploding continents and burning skies. But the truth is far quieter and infinitely more beautiful. To the ancient Maya, that date wasn't the end of the world. It was simply the end of a cycle, one great turning of their long count calendar, the completion of 13 backtons, or roughly 5,125 solar years. They called it the completion of a world age, not destruction, but transition. A new sunrise, not a final sunset. If we could ask a Maya priest about it, he might smile gently, confused by our fear. The world doesn't end, he would say. It breathes. It sleeps and wakes. It forgets and remembers. That is the nature of all things, even gods. The Maya had several calendars, each interlocking like gears in a cosmic machine. The Tzolk'in, a 260-day ritual calendar, guided ceremonies, divination, and the destiny of each person's birth. Every day had a name and a number, each combination repeating every 260 days. It was deeply personal. Priests used it to read lives the way we might read horoscopes, though with far more gravity. Then there was the Hab, a solar calendar of 365 days, divided into 18 months of 20 days each, plus a short, ominous 5-day period known as the Wayeb, a time when the boundaries between worlds thinned and spirits wandered freely. During the Wayeb, people avoided travel, made offerings, and waited for the sun to reset the cosmic balance. Together, the Tzolk'in and Hab formed a larger repeating pattern called the calendar round, a cycle of 52 years. To the Maya, 52 years was sacred. It was the span of a lifetime, the time it took for every date combination to repeat. Each cycle's completion was a moment of renewal, a cosmic exhale. But above all these was the long count,
a system designed not for human lifetimes, but for gods. It tracked the great ages of the world, stretching back to creation itself. The Maya believed the current world, the one we inhabit now, began on a day they recorded as 4 Aha 8 Kumku, a date that translates to August 11, 3114 before Christ in our calendar. That was the moment of rebirth, when the gods set time in motion again after destroying the previous world. To them, there had been worlds before ours, each created, destroyed, and remade in a cycle of divine experimentation. The gods, like artists, kept perfecting their work. The first world was made of mud. It dissolved. The second of wood. It burned. The third of flesh. It failed. But the fourth, the one we live in, was made of maize, the sacred corn from which humanity was shaped. And so long as the people honored that gift, through ritual, through order, through respect, the world would continue. Time itself, then, was a sacred responsibility. Every king, every priest, every farmer was part of keeping it turning. When a ruler performed bloodletting rituals, drawing a thorned rope through his tongue or skin, it wasn't mere spectacle. It was time maintenance. His blood was the oil that kept the gears of creation moving. The Maya did not fear time. They served it. But time, like a god, could grow hungry. In the centuries before the collapse, the inscriptions show an obsession with the calendar. Dates multiplied. Temples were aligned even more precisely with celestial events. Priests recorded eclipses, planetary conjunctions, even the crossings of Venus. It was as if they felt the cosmic clock ticking louder, faster, and perhaps they did. When drought came and kingdoms fell, it wasn't just political chaos, it was cosmological crisis. If the rains didn't come, it meant the rituals had failed. If the rituals had failed, it meant time itself was faltering. The sacred balance was breaking. In a sense, the Maya didn't just experience ecological collapse, they experienced metaphysical collapse. The very fabric of their world, the contract between humans and gods, was unraveling. Imagine watching your universe fall apart, not just physically, but spiritually. The stars still move, but their meaning changes. The priests still chant, but their voices echo off empty plazas. The sun still rises, but it feels somehow wrong. This wasn't just the fall of a civilization. It was the death of certainty. And yet in that death, there was wisdom. The Maya never wrote about a final end. They wrote about cycles. When one era ends, another begins. The wheel turns, and the gods return in new forms. The jungle that swallowed their cities was not an enemy. It was renewal, life reclaiming what was borrowed. Perhaps that's why their ruins don't feel dead. Walk through Palenque at dawn, and you feel the stones breathing. Climb El Castillo at sunset, and the light dances as if the gods still play upon its steps. Time never stopped here, it only changed its rhythm. Modern astronomers and mathematicians still marvel at their precision. The Maya calculated the length of the solar year as 365.2420 days, nearly identical to what modern instruments record today. They tracked the lunar cycle, the movements of Mars, and the intricate patterns of eclipses. Their priests knew the heavens intimately, not as abstract science, but as sacred relationship. In a sense, they didn't predict the future, they participated in it. And maybe that's what we lost somewhere along the way. We treat time as currency, a thing to spend, save, or waste. They treated it as communion. When their civilization fell silent, the cycle continued without them. The earth healed, the forests returned, the rain came again. From our perspective, it looks like loss. From theirs, perhaps it was simply renewal. It's strange to think that a culture so advanced, so intertwined with the sky, could fade so quietly. But maybe they didn't fade. They just stepped out of the spotlight of our timeline and into another rhythm, one that our calendars can no longer measure. Because even now, in remote villages, Maya priests still mark the Tzolk'in. They still light incense to the four directions, offering cornmeal to the winds, whispering prayers that echo the oldest language on this continent. The gods they honor have changed names, faces, and altars, but the cycle remains. Their world ended, and yet it didn't. And that perhaps is the most haunting truth of all. They understood endings better than we ever will. For them, endings were never empty. They were the pause before another beginning. So when we ask, why did the Maya civilization disappear overnight, maybe the answer is that it never truly did. It simply turned a page in the book of time, one that we, centuries later, are only just learning how to read. Still, there's one part of the story we haven't yet touched, the human one.
The kings who watched their divine power crumble, the priests who questioned the silence of the gods, the farmers who buried their last seeds and prayed for rain that never came. In our next part, we'll step into their world, not as archaeologists, but as witnesses. We'll walk through the final days of a city that knew it was dying and see what it means when faith and hunger collide beneath a burning sky. Because sometimes, to understand history, you have to feel its heartbeat right before it stops. The year is somewhere around 850 after Christ. The world is still, the sky white with heat. In the heart of the Peten rainforest, the city of Tikal, once a jewel of kings and astronomers, stands uneasy beneath the relentless sun. The air tastes of dust. The rain has not come. If you were to stand atop Temple 4, the tallest of Tikal's pyramids, you would see a horizon of green stretching endlessly, trees rising like waves over the buried bones of the earth. But within the city, the green is dying. The reservoirs are half empty, their stone linings cracked. The canals stink with algae. The air hums with insects that thrive in drought, the desperate buzz of life clinging to what little remains. Once, this was a place of miracles. The plaza below would have been alive with dancers and musicians, drums pounding like the heartbeat of the gods. The scent of copal resin would have filled the air, thick and sweet, as priests lifted bowls of incense toward the heavens. Merchants from distant cities would have walked these same paths, carrying jade, cacao, obsidian, feathers shimmering like captured sunlight. Now the plazas are quieter. The murals in the temples are fading. The glyphs that once sang of kings and triumphs now sit in shadow, their stories half-eaten by moss. The marketplace still opens each morning, but fewer traders come. Fewer goods arrive. The maize harvest, once abundant, has failed again. There is still life, yes, but it feels fragile, stretched thin like the last breath of a fire. In the royal compound, King Yikin Chen Kuil's descendants still hold court, but their voices echo in halls that no longer carry power. The sacred line of divine rulers has frayed. The king is tired, his face gaunt. His priests whisper behind him. His generals mutter about rebellion in nearby valleys. And beyond the city walls, the jungle waits, patient as always. Every morning, the priests still climb the temple steps to greet the rising sun. They wear heavy cloaks, embroidered with feathers, their skin streaked with red pigment and ash. They lift their arms and chant the old hymns, though their voices tremble. Their eyes flick often to the horizon, to the gathering dust, to the clouds that form but refuse to break. They still believe, or they try to, but faith, like the crops, needs water. At midday, the city gathers for a ritual. The people have been promised that the gods will hear them again, that the drought will end if they show their devotion. It is not the first such ceremony, nor will it be the last, but desperation has changed the tone.
The prayers sound raw, pleading, as if the people are trying to convince themselves more than the sky. At the center of the plaza, a young man kneels beside an altar carved with the image of Chak, the rain god. He is calm, almost serene, as the priest ties cords around his wrists. His family watches in silence. There is no protest. Everyone here understands the price of rain. When the obsidian blade flashes, the crowd cries out, not in horror, but in hope. The blood runs across the stone, thick and red, mingling with the dust. The priest lifts his hands to the sky, his voice hoarse. Chak, Lord of Lightning, drink and remember us. But the sky remains clear. Somewhere in the crowd, a woman sobs quietly, clutching a child too weak to stand. A trader spits into the dirt, muttering that perhaps the gods have died, or left, or never cared at all. A soldier watches, his jaw tight, the grip on his spear trembling. Faith, once unshakable, is beginning to fracture. That night, the stars come out brilliant and cold. The priests retreat to the observatory, climbing its narrow stairway with torches in hand. From the top, they trace Venus through the sky. It is bright, too bright, and its timing is wrong. The priests exchange uneasy looks. Their tables of calculation, carved in bark and stone, say Venus should rise later. Something is wrong with the heavens. To the Maya, such an error is not a small thing. The stars are the language of the gods. If the patterns shift, it means the gods themselves are shifting. The priests kneel, whispering prayers not of worship, but of fear. If even the sky is uncertain, what is left to trust? Days pass. The heat deepens. The wells dry. The jungle begins to creep back toward the city's edges. Monkeys move into abandoned courtyards. The stone faces of the temples crack under the sun. And yet, even as the world falls apart, life goes on. Children play in the shadow of monuments they no longer understand. A potter shapes clay vessels by the dying light. A mother hums to her baby as she grinds maize that will not last the week. People cling to their routines because routine is the last defense against despair. Then, one morning, the drums stop. The last ceremony has been held. The king's final decree, carved in haste, declares a pilgrimage to the north, to seek water, or perhaps refuge. Families begin to gather what they can carry. Clay figurines, maize seeds, a few woven mats. The priests pack the sacred books, the codices written on bark paper, symbols of knowledge so fragile they can crumble in the humidity. They leave offerings at the altars, jewels, feathers, food, and turn their backs on the temples that once defined their lives. As the procession moves out through the forest paths, the city grows silent. The fires die. The jungle begins to breathe again. Insects return to the plazas. Moss claims the steps. Within weeks, vines hang from the temple walls like curtains. Parrots nest in the cracks. The jungle swallows sound and memory alike. Tikal is gone, but it doesn't know it yet. Centuries will pass before another human foot touches its stones. By then, the world will have changed beyond recognition. The Spanish will arrive, centuries later, and find only whispers. The locals will tell stories of ghost cities, places too sacred or cursed to enter, where the air is thick with the sighs of forgotten gods. But for now, in that 9th century dusk, the last of the Maya who built this place still walk beneath its trees. One old priest lingers at the base of Temple Eye, his fingers tracing the glyphs carved long ago. He whispers their names, one by one, the kings, the gods, the ancestors.
His voice cracks as he speaks the last one.
He places a small bowl of water on the stone. The surface trembles, reflecting the fading light of the sun. He stares into it, waiting for an answer. None comes. So he rises, slowly, and leaves the bowl there for the gods who no longer speak. When he disappears into the forest, the wind stirs the surface of the water once, twice, then stills. A single leaf falls into it, breaks the reflection, and drifts to the bottom. The jungle closes. And yet, even as silence settles, something of Tikal remains. The city is not truly dead. Its stones remember. Its temples still stand, their angles aligned perfectly with the rising sun and the star of Venus. The architecture holds a language that even time cannot erase, a geometry of devotion carved into limestone and sky. When archaeologists first uncovered Tikal centuries later, they found not ruins, but resurrection. The temples still pointed to the heavens. The glyphs still told the stories of kings who wanted to live forever. The echoes of drums seemed to hang in the air, just out of reach. It's as if the Maya had built their memory into the bones of the world itself, knowing that one day, somewhere, someone would listen. Perhaps that's why walking through Tikal doesn't feel like visiting a ruin. It feels like entering a dream that never ended. And maybe, in some way, it hasn't. Because the cycle, the sacred rhythm the Maya believed in, still turns. The rain returns, the vines bloom, the temples breathe. The gods may have fallen silent, but the earth still speaks their language. In the end, the fall of Tikal wasn't just a tragedy, it was a transformation, a return to balance. The jungle took back what was borrowed, and the gods reclaimed what was promised. If you listen closely, even now, at dusk, you might hear it. The faint sound of drums beneath the trees, the whisper of prayers carried by the wind. The Maya didn't vanish. They became part of the world they once worshipped. And somewhere, perhaps, the old priest's bowl still rests on that stone, filled again with rain. Because even in the ruins of faith, the sky eventually remembers how to weep. When the people of the southern lowlands abandoned their cities, they didn't disappear into myth. They walked north, slowly, painfully, stubbornly, carrying what they could and what they could not bear to leave behind. The roads they took were ancient. Long before the drought, these causeways, white limestone highways known as Sakbeab, had linked city to city, temple to temple, heart to heart. They were more than roads. They were veins of civilization, glowing in moonlight, guiding pilgrims and traders across the forest. Now, those same roads bore the weight of exodus. Families walked them in silence, their sandals worn thin, the air thick with dust and insects. Behind them, the jungle devoured what they left. Before them, the horizon shimmered with heat. They followed the rumors that in the north the rain still fell, that the gods still listened there. The journey was not swift. Some never made it. But those who did found a land different from the Old South. Flatter, drier, edged by the sea. The limestone ground was cruel, the soil thin, but the people adapted. They dug wells deep into the rock, created new reservoirs, and learned to draw water from cenotes, natural sinkholes that opened like blue eyes into the underworld. To the newcomers, these cenotes were more than resources. They were sacred. The Maya believed the cenotes were mouths of Xibalba, the underworld, the realm of the gods of death and water. Every drop of rain that fell returned eventually to these wells, and through them to the world below. So when the migrants reached the northern plains, they didn't see scarcity, they saw portals. Around those portals, they built again. The first great city of the New Age rose not in defiance of the jungle, but in alliance with it.
Its name was Chichen Itza, the mouth of the well of the Itza. It would become one of the most powerful and mysterious cities the Maya ever built. By the 10th century, Chichen Itza had grown vast and rich, spreading over nearly 5 square kilometers. Its plazas were immense, its pyramids tall, its art astonishingly precise. Unlike Tikal, which had been hemmed in by rainforest, Chichen Itza opened to the wind and the horizon. The sea was not far, and the city thrived as a hub of trade. Here, the Maya encountered new influences, merchants from the Gulf Coast, travelers from the highlands, and, eventually, the Toltecs from central Mexico. Their arrival changed everything. The Toltecs brought with them their own gods and symbols: serpents with feathers, warriors with curved blades, and myths of Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent who brought knowledge to humanity. To the Maya, this god was familiar. They called him Kukulkan, and he became the new heartbeat of the north. Under his sign, Chichen Itza transformed. Its greatest pyramid, El Castillo, was not merely a temple, but a cosmic instrument. Its 4 stairways aligned perfectly with the sun. Each spring and autumn equinox, the setting light cast the shadow of a serpent slithering down the side of the pyramid, Kukulkan descending from the heavens. Thousands would gather to witness it. The air would tremble with drums, flutes, and chanting. To modernize, it was spectacle. To them, it was proof that time still listened, that the gods had not forsaken the Maya after all. Around the pyramid, the city pulsed with life. Stone warriors guarded courtyards filled with pillars carved with serpents and eagles. A massive ball court, the largest in Mesoamerica, echoed with the sound of rubber balls striking stone. The game was not play, it was prayer. The players moved with ritual grace, reenacting the cosmic battle between light and darkness. At its end, the winner, or the chosen one, might be sacrificed, his blood feeding the sun. To the Maya, death in that arena was not defeat, it was transcendence. Nearby, the sacred cenote glimmered in the heat. Offerings were cast into its depths: gold, jade, pottery, obsidian, and human lives. Those who were chosen to descend into its dark waters were believed to enter the underworld and speak directly with Chak, the god of rain. Some never returned. Others were pulled from the depths alive, reborn, their skins stained with silt and divinity. Life at Chichen Itza was vibrant but also fragile. Power and piety coexisted uneasily. The city became a melting pot of beliefs: Maya gods standing beside Toltec warriors, old traditions blending with new. Its rulers claimed divine blood, but their thrones rested on a precarious balance of trade, fear, and faith. Still, for 2 centuries, it endured. Merchants brought goods from distant lands: turquoise from the north, obsidian from the mountains, feathers from the tropics, salt from the coast. The market plazas filled with voices speaking different dialects. Astronomers studied the sky from their observatory, an elegant circular tower now called El Caracol, the snail, because of its winding staircase. Through narrow windows, they tracked the path of Venus, the same celestial warrior their ancestors once feared and adored. And yet, even here, in the New World, the old shadows crept back. By the year 1200, the climate began to shift again. The rains grew erratic, crops faltered, trade routes fractured. The Toltec influence waned. Factions within Chichen Itza turned on each other. The temple walls that once echoed with chants of unity now bore the silence of intrigue. In the chronicles of later Maya scribes, there is a phrase whispered about this era: "The day the wind turned against us." They say the wind carried with it not just drought, but war. Chichen Itza's dominance faded. Another city rose in its place, Mayapan. Smaller, less ornate, but fiercely ambitious.
It became the center of a confederation of northern cities, ruled by councils rather than divine kings. For a time, it seemed a new balance had been found, a more human order replacing the godly one. But human orders too crumble. By the 1400s, Mayapan had collapsed in civil war. Its temples were looted, its walls broken, its rulers slain by their own guards. Once again, the jungle closed in. Once again, the wheel turned. The Maya had learned to survive the fall of empires, but not to escape the cycle. And yet, through it all, the essence of their world remained. Even as kingdoms died, villages endured. The farmers still planted maize with prayers to chalk. The healers still whispered to the spirits of the forest. The weavers still wove the colors of the calendar into their cloth. The Maya world was no longer carved in stone. It was carried in flesh and memory. When the Spanish arrived in the 16th century, they found not ruins, but people. Proud, weary, and unbroken. The conquistadors wrote of villages built beside ancient temples, of farmers living among pyramids as if they were part of the landscape itself. They could not understand how such ruins could exist without rulers, without armies, without a living empire. They mistook resilience for ignorance. The Spanish priests burned what they could not comprehend, the codices, the painted books that held centuries of wisdom. Thousands of them turned to smoke in the tropical air. The flames devoured knowledge that no one alive could replace. Histories, star charts, myths, songs. Only 4 survived. 4. But the Maya themselves survived. They took their gods and hid them behind the faces of saints. They took their rituals and wrapped them in the language of the church. They continued their calendar in secret, marking sacred days on the walls of their homes. Time itself became resistance. And somewhere, deep in the Yucatan, an old priest lit a candle before a statue of the Virgin Mary, whispered a prayer to chalk, and smiled, because he knew the gods were listening even under new names. That is the paradox of the Maya story. They fell again and again, yet they never disappeared. Each collapse was not extinction, but transformation. In the south, they built kingdoms that touched the stars. In the north, they built cities that danced with light. And when both fell, they built a way of life that outlived them all. Today, millions of Maya descendants still walk the same lands. They speak more than 30 languages, some so old that their roots predate the pyramids themselves. Their children still learn to read the sky, to honor the rains, to plant the corn that links them to the gods. The calendar still turns, the songs still rise. The empire vanished, but the people never did. And perhaps that is the real secret of the Maya. They didn't build for eternity because they wanted to last forever. They built because they understood they never would. Every stone they placed was a conversation with time, a promise whispered to the earth. We will return. And in a way, they have. Archaeologists still uncover their roads. Historians still decipher their words. Travelers still climb their pyramids to watch the serpent of light descend on the equinox. Each discovery, each footstep, each whisper in the jungle is part of that return. The Maya never stopped speaking. We simply forgot how to listen. But the question remains, the one that haunts every civilization that rises and falls. If time moves in cycles, as the Maya believed, what happens when our own world reaches its turn? Next time, we'll explore that question. In Part 7, we will look not only at the Maya, but at ourselves. How their vision of time, balance, and renewal may hold a warning from modern civilization. Because perhaps, without realizing it, we are walking the same path they once did. And the jungle, patient as always, is still waiting.
When we look back at the Maya, it's easy to feel distant. They lived 1,000 years ago. They carved their gods into stone, counted time on their hands, and spoke to the sky as if it were alive. We, on the other hand, have satellites, digital calendars, algorithms that predict the weather to the hour. We feel untouchable, modern, rational. And yet, when you strip away the glass, the wires, and the noise, our world begins to look eerily familiar. The Maya once ruled a landscape shaped by ingenuity. They built reservoirs to trap rain, canals to water their fields, and roads that connected vast territories. Their cities were masterpieces of engineering, their knowledge of astronomy breathtaking. But beneath that brilliance, a quiet imbalance was growing, one small decision at a time. They cut forests for limestone. They burned wood for plaster. They farmed more land to feed more mouths. And slowly, the Earth began to push back. Sound familiar? Modern climate scientists have a phrase for it: the tipping point. The Maya reached theirs long before we named ours. Their forests disappeared, the soil eroded, the rain faltered. The balance between humanity and nature, once sacred, became strained. And when the droughts came, the system that had seemed eternal began to crack. We think of collapse as sudden, a single catastrophic event. But for them, it was a whisper stretched across generations. The same whisper that hums through our own cities today. Because we too are living inside an age of abundance. Our towers scrape the clouds. Our lights erase the stars. We move faster, eat more, build higher. We have built our own Tikal, our own Chichen Itza, steel and glass instead of limestone and jade, but no less proud. And like the Maya, we tell ourselves it will last forever. But civilizations rarely vanish in one night. They fade quietly, beneath the noise of progress. The first cracks appear not in stone, but in spirit. The same signs that haunted the Maya, famine, drought, division, are shadows that walk beside us still. The Maya kings believed they could control the heavens through ritual. We believe we can control them through technology. Yet both beliefs carry the same arrogance. The idea that we stand outside the natural world, that we can bend its cycles to our will. The Maya didn't destroy their world out of malice. They did it out of devotion, to the gods, to their cities, to their own survival. They believed the earth existed to sustain them, that the rains would always return, that time would always renew itself. And we build and burn and consume with the same faith, faith that tomorrow will always look like today. But the earth remembers differently. Archaeologists studying Maya collapse found something remarkable in the sediment of old lakes. Not just evidence of drought, but of smoke. Massive layers of charcoal stretching across decades. The forests didn't vanish naturally, they were burned. The Maya cleared more land to compensate for dwindling harvests, desperate to feed their people. Every new fire stripped the soil further, making the next harvest weaker, the next fire larger. It was a cycle of desperation, one that feels painfully familiar. When the rains didn't come, they built more temples. When the gods stayed silent, they offered more blood. Their response to crisis was escalation. Ours is consumption. They doubled down on the system that was killing them because it was the only one they knew. So do we. It's a strange comfort, isn't it, to know that humanity has always been this way, brilliant, creative, self-assured, and blind. But the Maya didn't vanish into extinction. They transformed. Their civilization fell, but their people adapted, endured, redefined themselves. In that, there is hope. Because maybe collapse isn't the end. Maybe it's a kind of rebirth. The Maya taught that time moves in cycles. Creation, destruction, renewal. Each one feeding the next. When a city dies, the jungle blooms.
When a kingdom falls, its people learn new ways to live. To them, endings were not failures, but transformations. What if the same is true for us? Perhaps the question isn't whether civilization will collapse, but whether we will be wise enough to listen before it does. Look around. The weather is changing, seas are rising, rivers are drying, forests are burning. We measure the damage in data, in graphs and charts, but behind every number is the same story the Maya once lived. Crops that fail, families that move, faiths that falter. History doesn't repeat, it rhymes, and in that rhythm, the Maya are still speaking. If you stand in their ruins long enough, if you let the jungle hum around you, you begin to hear it. Their warning, soft and steady. Balance is borrowed. It's a phrase that echoes through every fallen empire, the Romans, the Mesopotamians, the Khmer, the Maya. Each reached for eternity. Each forgot that eternity belongs only to the earth. What makes the Maya story so haunting is not its mystery, but its familiarity. They had everything: science, art, spirituality, community, and still they could not escape themselves. Maybe we never do. But unlike them, we have their story. We have their ruins as mirrors, and mirrors, if we're brave enough to look, show us not just what was, but what is becoming. Imagine 1,000 years from now, an archaeologist walking through the skeleton of one of our cities. She brushes dust from a crumbled skyscraper, studies a plastic bottle fossilized in silt, a phone screen buried in glassy sand. She wonders who we were, what we believed, why we vanished. She will find signs of brilliance and madness, just as we found in Tikal. She will see that we too mapped the stars and worshipped our own gods, prophet, comfort, and that we too believed they would save us. And perhaps she will whisper what we whisper now about the Maya. How could they not have seen it coming? But the truth is, they did. They saw it in the withering corn, the empty skies, the silent gods. They just didn't know how to stop the wheel once it began to turn. Neither do we. Still, there's a quiet beauty in their failure. Because in the end, the Maya didn't destroy the world, they gave it back. The jungle that devoured their cities also preserved them. The stone temples they left behind became time capsules of wisdom, lessons carved in silence. And when the jungle finally reclaimed Tikal and Palenque, it did not erase them, it held them, like a parent holding a sleeping child. We often speak of nature as something separate from ourselves, but the Maya never did. To them, the gods lived in the rain, the maize, the stone, the fire. They understood that the divine was not above the world, but within it. And when they fell, it wasn't punishment, it was return. That, perhaps, is the truest difference between them and us. They knew how to surrender. We, on the other hand, fear it. We rage against the dying of light, build higher, dig deeper, burn longer. We mistake survival for victory. But maybe survival means learning when to stop fighting. When you stand among the ruins of a Maya city at dusk, the air feels thick with understanding. The temples glow gold in the fading sun, and the cries of birds sound almost like laughter, distant, timeless. You can almost sense that the world isn't mourning here, it's remembering. The Maya didn't vanish in despair, they folded themselves into the rhythm of the earth. And perhaps that's what we must learn to do, not to conquer the world, but to return to its cycle, to move with it instead of against it. The story of their disappearance, then, is not just a warning, it's an invitation. To look up from our own monuments of steel and see the sky again. To listen to the rain, not as data, but as prayer. To understand that civilizations are temporary, but harmony can be eternal. Maybe the lesson Maya left us is this. When the sky forgets to rain, don't build taller temples, build smaller dreams. Dreams that fit within the rhythm of the world. Because the gods may change, the tools may change, but the earth, quiet, patient, forgiving, remains the same. And somewhere in the ruins of time, the Maya are still whispering through the leaves. Everything returns. In the darkness beneath the earth, there is a river that glows. It winds through caverns where the air is thick and warm, filled with the scent of limestone and old rain. Water drips from the ceilings like a heartbeat. The light that shimmers across the surface isn't sunlight, it's memory. The Maya called this place Xibalba, the place of fear. But it was not hell, not punishment, not even sorrow. It was the underworld, yes, but also the heart of creation, a place of endings and beginnings. Every Maya soul, from the humblest farmer to the most radiant king, would one day pass through its gates. Death to them was not a door that closed, it was a path that turned. The story of Xibalba comes to us through one of the most beautiful and mysterious texts ever written, the Popol Vuh, the sacred book of the Quiche Maya. It is a myth, a memory, and a mirror of how they understood existence itself. It tells of gods and heroes, of worlds born and destroyed, of humans shaped from maize and gifted with the breath of life. But at its core, it is about a journey, the descent into darkness and the return to light. Long ago, before humans walked the earth, two brothers known as the Hero Twins, Hunahpu and Palenque, were summoned to Xibalba by the lords of death. The gods below were jealous of their skill, their laughter, their defiance. They invited the brothers to play a ball game in the underworld, but their invitation was a trap. The path to Xibalba was long and perilous, filled with trials. Rivers of scorpions, rivers of blood, houses of knives, of darkness, of cold. In each chamber, the twins faced illusions and danger. The lords of death demanded obedience, but the brothers gave them wit instead. When the gods tried to destroy them, the twins let themselves be broken, only to rise again, transformed. One became the sun, the other the moon. Together they restored balance to the world above. To the Maya, this was not just a story, it was the shape of reality. Life and death, failure and triumph, loss and renewal, all part of the same divine game. That belief gave the Maya something extraordinary: courage. When their cities fell, when the rains failed, when their gods fell silent, they didn't see themselves as cursed. They saw themselves as walking through Xibalba, as if civilization itself had entered the underworld, awaiting rebirth. And in a way, it had. Even in the darkest times of the classic collapse, the Maya never stopped building. Archaeologists have found new temples erected atop ruins, altars raised beside shattered monuments. The symbols changed, but the rhythm remained. It was as though each new generation was whispering to the next, "Keep walking, the dawn will come." That's the essence of Xibalba, not despair, but endurance. Imagine for a moment what it must have felt like to live through those centuries. To wake in a city half claimed by vines, to hear the jungle singing louder than the marketplace, to lose your gods, your rulers, your certainty, and yet to keep planting corn, to keep teaching your children the names of the stars, to keep whispering the stories of the Hero Twins. The Maya believed that when the world falls apart, the only way forward is through. You don't flee Xibalba, you face it. You walk its rivers, you pass its tests. You let yourself be broken so you can rise again. That is why, even after their collapse, they never truly vanished. The gods of the underworld did not devour them, they transformed them. In the caves of Belize, in places like Octon Tunich Muknal, archaeologists have found the physical echoes of this belief. Human offerings laid beside ceramic vessels, each arranged with astonishing care. On the walls, the soot of torches forms dark halos.
On the ground, bones shimmer with calcite, crystallized by centuries of dripping water. Every object, every body, every mark in the stone is part of a conversation between the living and the dead. The Maya saw caves as veins of the earth, Xibalba's open mouth. When drought struck, they went into those mouths, not to hide, but to negotiate, to offer, to ask, to remember. The deeper they went, the closer they came to the heart of the divine. In modern times, divers and archaeologists who enter those same caves describe an uncanny feeling, as if they are intruding into a space that is still alive.
The water is cold, the air heavy, the silence complete. And somewhere in the depths, bones lie waiting, still glimmering in the dim light. The offerings are undisturbed. It feels, one researcher said, as though the Maya have just stepped outside and will return any moment. Perhaps they never left, because Xibalba is not a place you escape from, it's a place you carry. It exists in the soil, in the storms, in the stillness between heartbeats. And maybe that's why the Maya endured. When their empires fell, they didn't fight the darkness, they walked through it. They accepted what every civilization eventually forgets, that no structure, no power, no God is eternal. Only the cycle is. In the Popol Vuh, after the hero twins ascend as the sun and moon, the lords of death are not destroyed. They remain, humbled but eternal. The underworld is not conquered, it is balanced. That was the Maya vision of the universe. Not good against evil, not victory or defeat, but balance. Everything has its place. Even decay is sacred. It's a vision that feels almost alien to us today. We live in a world obsessed with progress, growth, and light. We fear darkness. We fight endings. But to the Maya, darkness was not the enemy, it was the womb. Every seed grows in darkness. Every dawn rises from it. Every world begins in it. When the Maya watched the sun disappear beneath the horizon, they didn't see it as death. They saw it as the hero twins returning to Xibalba, descending into the underworld to fight the battles that make sunrise possible. Perhaps that's why their cities face the east. Every morning, the first rays of the sun touched their temples like a promise kept. The gods had gone below, but they always came back. Even now, 1,000 years later, that promise lingers. If you visit the ruins at dawn, the mist curls around the temples like smoke from an ancient offering. The jungle hums softly, as though the earth itself is dreaming. And when the first light spills over the stones, it feels like the moment the hero twins returned. You can almost hear them laughing, defiant, triumphant, after outwitting death one more time. The Maya understood something we are only beginning to remember. That endings and beginnings are the same breath, exhaled and inhaled by the universe. Their journey through Xibalba wasn't just a myth, it was a blueprint for survival. When life collapses, you don't curse the darkness, you walk into it with courage. You trust that somewhere, beyond the fear, the river will glow again. And that's the story they left us, not in their temples or their scripts, but in their silence. In the way their civilization could vanish and yet remain, invisible but unbroken. They became part of the earth's own memory, their souls stitched into the rhythm of rain and root. Every storm over the Yucatan, every drop that falls into a cenote, every seed that bursts through the soil, each one is a small echo of their faith that life never truly ends. So when we ask what happened to the Maya, perhaps the answer is simple. They went into Xibalba, and they never came back, because they never needed to. They learned to live inside it. And maybe, in our own way, so must we. When the Spanish first saw the Yucatan coast in the early 16th century, they thought they had stumbled upon islands. The jungle rose like green smoke from the horizon, the air thick with heat, the sea a mirror of blinding light.
What they didn't realize was that this land was already ancient, that beneath the vines and roots lay the bones of cities that had been old before their own kingdoms were born. The Maya were still here, scattered, diminished, but unbroken. Their great temples stood silent, but their villages hummed with life. They spoke languages older than the Spanish crown. They still grew maize, still honored the rain, still measured time by the turning of the heavens. But the world that arrived on their shores spoke a different language, the language of conquest. In 1511, a Spanish ship wrecked off the coast of Yucatan. A handful of survivors washed ashore, and among them was a man named Gonzalo Guerrero, who would later become a legend. Captured by the Maya, Guerrero learned their tongue, took a Maya wife, and became a warrior in their armies. He tattooed his face, pierced his ears, and led battles against the very men who once called him brother. When Hernán Cortés landed years later, Guerrero refused to return. "I am married," he said. "I have children, and I am a chief among these people. I am one of them now." His story became a whisper of resistance, a symbol of how identities could merge, how even conquest could not erase belonging. But Guerrero's defiance was an exception. The Spanish conquest of the Maya world would take nearly 2 centuries, a long, brutal process of fire, faith, and betrayal. The Maya did not fall easily. Their lands were not like those of the Aztecs or the Incas, no single empire to topple, no capital to capture. Instead, there were hundreds of small kingdoms, each fierce and independent, scattered across jungles and mountains. The conquistadors came with muskets and steel, but the jungle fought for the Maya. It swallowed armies. It hid villages. It turned roads to mud and rivers to traps. Even when the Spaniards conquered one city, another would rise behind the trees. The Maya learned to melt into the forest, to strike and vanish like ghosts. The wars dragged on for generations, long after the rest of the Americas had been subdued. But war was only part of the conquest. The greater battle was for the soul. The Spanish priests came with crosses and fire. They called the old gods demons, the sacred books heresy. They burned the codices, those delicate pages of bark paper filled with glyphs and stars, the accumulated wisdom of centuries. Only 4 of those books survived. 4! Imagine that. The entire library of a civilization turned to ash, its voice silenced in smoke. The flames consumed not only history, but identity. The priests believed they were saving souls. The Maya knew they were watching the world end again. Yet even as their temples fell and their gods were outlawed, they adapted. They always had. The Maya had lived through droughts, famines, wars, collapses. They understood survival. This was just another kind of Xibalba. So they walked through it in silence, hiding their fire beneath new names. In the churches the Spaniards built atop their ruins, the Maya knelt beside the colonizers, but their prayers were double-edged. Outwardly, they prayed to saints. Inwardly, they whispered to their old gods. The Virgin Mary became Ixchel, goddess of the moon and fertility. St. Thomas wore the face of Chalk, god of rain. Each crucifix held 2 meanings, one for the conqueror, one for the conquered. It was the quietest rebellion in history. The Spanish saw conversion. The Maya saw transformation. In the village festivals, drums still beat the same rhythms as before, masked by Christian songs. In every embroidered cloth, the old symbols, corn, serpent, sun, were woven into patterns too intricate for foreign eyes to notice. The calendar priests, now disguised as humble farmers, kept the sacred count in secret. Each day still had its number and name, each ritual its appointed hour. The Spaniards burned their books, but they could not burn memory. And so the Maya endured, generation after generation, their language like water flowing beneath a frozen river. But the conquest left scars. Disease, forced labor, slavery, all swept through the land like a second drought. Millions perished, villages vanished, entire lineages were broken. Those who survived carried grief in silence, folding it into their daily lives like another thread in the loom. Yet amid the darkness, something remarkable happened. The old and new worlds began to merge, not in peace, but in persistence. In the town of Santiago Atitlan, in the highlands of Guatemala, a figure still stands in every house. Maximan, a cigar-smoking, rum-drinking saint draped in scarves. He is both a Christian and a god older than Christianity, a blend of Judas, Saint Simon, and a pre-Columbian deity of fertility and trickery. When villagers pray to him, they light candles, pour him liquor, and ask for blessings in voices that mix Spanish and Quiche. His face changes with the seasons, but his spirit never dies. He is the perfect symbol of Maya survival, part defiance, part adaptation, wholly alive. The Spaniards came to erase a people. The Maya responded by becoming unerasable. Even when forced into missions, even when forbidden to speak their language, they carried their world inside them. The maize they planted was the same maize from which, according to their creation myth, humans were born. The stars they watched were the same stars their ancestors mapped. The gods they invoked had simply changed costumes. The fire lived on, in kitchens, in songs, in stories told to children before sleep. And sometimes it flared into open rebellion. In 1546, the Maya of eastern Yucatan rose against the Spanish in a great revolt. They slaughtered colonists, seized towns, and for a brief moment the jungle belonged to them again. The Spanish called it heresy. The Maya called it remembrance. But the rebellion was crushed. Its leaders were hanged, their bodies displayed in the plazas where they had once danced. The survivors went deeper into the forest, carrying their gods with them. And there, hidden in the green heart of the Yucatan, they kept their promise, that the Maya world would never die. Even centuries later, the cycle of resistance continued. In the 19th century, long after Spain had fallen, the Maya rose again in what became known as the caste war of Yucatan. For decades, they fought Mexican armies and colonial powers, building their own secret kingdom in the jungle, the Cruzov, or People of the Cross. They built churches, not for Christ, but for their own gods in disguise. They carved wooden crosses that spoke through prophets, giving orders from heaven. To outsiders, it looked like fanaticism. To the Maya, it was the voice of time itself, echoing through another cycle of struggle. When their enemies asked them why they fought so long, the Maya answered simply, "Because the gods have not finished speaking." And perhaps they never will. Today, when you walk through the Yucatan, you can still hear that echo. It hums in the language, in the festivals, in the rhythm of drums that rise at dusk. In the marketplace, a grandmother selling corn murmurs a prayer to Chalk under her breath before the first rain. In a small chapel, a candle burns before the Virgin, and in the flicker of its flame, if you look closely, you might see a serpent coiled in the shadow. The conquerors brought fire. The Maya kept the flame. And though centuries have passed, that fire still glows, quiet, steady, patient. Because the Maya learned the oldest truth of all. You don't defeat darkness by fighting it. You survive it. You walk through it. You learn its rhythm until it becomes part of you. And when the world changes, you change with it, but never against yourself. So when we ask how this civilization vanished overnight, perhaps the answer lies here, in the soft persistence of a people who refused to vanish at all. They understood that empires fall, gods change, languages die, but life endures, always. Somewhere in a village deep in the forest, a child is learning the old stories again. The rain is coming, the drums are beginning, and the jungle, vast and green, is breathing. The Maya world is still alive. It just learned how to hide. The jungle never forgets. It waits. For centuries, it has cradled the ruins of a world once brilliant with sound and color. The temples, the plazas, the stone faces staring skyward, all half swallowed by vines and silence. But now, at last, the silence is breaking. Across Central America, the descendants of the Maya are waking to the echo of their own history. In the villages of Guatemala, Belize, and southern Mexico, the old languages are still spoken, not as relics, but as living threads binding the present to the past. Children still greet each other in Quiche, Yucatec, or Quechua.
Farmers still whisper thanks to the rain god Chalk before the first planting. Midwives still bless newborns under the same stars their ancestors charted. For centuries, these customs survived in secret, hidden beneath the cloak of Christianity, whispered in kitchens and fields, passed from one generation to the next. But today, they are no longer whispered, they are sung. In the highlands of Guatemala, an elder named Don Juan Choke, his face carved with time, stands before a small crowd. His hands trace circles in the air as he explains the Tzolk'in, the sacred 260-day calendar. Each day, he says, is a seed, and we are the soil. Our lives grow in its rhythm, just as the maize grows with the sun. His voice carries across the plaza, into cell phones and cameras. Young Maya filmmakers record him, post his lessons online, translate them into Spanish and English. The ancient calendar, once banned and burned, now flows through fiber optics, reborn in the digital age. This is not nostalgia, it is reclamation. For 500 years, the world told the Maya that they were a people of the past, that their temples were ruins, their language primitive, their gods dead. But the truth is rising again, like a serpent of light along the pyramid steps. It began with the archaeologists. In the mid-20th century, scholars from around the world, American, Mexican, Guatemalan, came to study the glyphs carved into Maya stone. For generations, those glyphs had been a mystery, elegant but mute. The first European scholars had dismissed them as mere decoration, too complex to be real writing. Then came the breakthrough. In the 1950s, a Russian linguist named Yuri Knorozov made a bold claim. The glyphs were phonetic. They weren't abstract symbols, but sounds. Syllables forming words, sentences, stories. The Maya hadn't carved images, they had carved speech. It took decades of debate, but slowly the code unraveled. The stones began to speak. Names of kings, dates of births and deaths, wars, alliances, rituals, prophecies. The history of a people once thought lost came flooding back. But the most profound discoveries weren't made by outsiders. They were made by Maya themselves. In the last few decades, a new generation of Maya epigraphers, linguists, and archaeologists has emerged. Young men and women whose ancestors built the cities they now study. They walk through the ruins not as strangers, but as heirs returning home. At the site of Copan, a young researcher named David Stewart once deciphered the name of a long-forgotten ruler, only to be joined years later by Maya scholars who could read not just the words, but their soul. "You see," one of them said softly, tracing the glyphs with his finger, "these are not kings, they are our grandparents." And suddenly, archaeology was no longer excavation. It was communion. In the Yucatan, Maya architects now work with historians to restore temples using traditional techniques. limestone mixed with sap, polished by hand, aligned with the stars. In Guatemala, community schools teach children to read both the Latin alphabet and the ancient glyphs side by side. They learn that their ancestors invented zero before the Romans ever dreamed of it, that they charted Venus with precision unmatched for centuries, that their heritage is not ruin but renaissance. And yet, this reawakening is not only about pride, it is about healing. For the Maya people, history has been both wound and weapon. The centuries of conquest, enslavement, and silence left scars deeper than stone. Many grew up believing that to be Maya was to be poor, backward, invisible. Speaking their language in school brought punishment. Practicing their rituals invited scorn. Now, for the first time in generations, being Maya is something to celebrate aloud. Festivals once suppressed are blooming again. In towns like Chichicastenango, masked dancers perform the Baile de la Conquista, a haunting pageant where the Spanish conquest is reenacted and inverted. Beneath the Christian symbolism, the dancers tell an older truth, that the spirit of the Maya cannot be conquered, only transformed. At night, the streets glow with candles, the air rich with incense. The drums throb like heartbeats echoing across centuries. The people wear embroidered huipiles patterned with the stars, each thread a story of ancestors who refuse to fade. In those moments, the line between past and present dissolves. The gods walk again among their children. And yet, the struggle continues. Poverty, land disputes, and the lingering weight of discrimination still shadow many Maya communities. The modern world has not been kind to ancient nations, but something in their resilience feels eternal. When the jungles hide the old cities, the Maya find new ones, in classrooms, in digital archives, in stories told across continents. Their resilience has always been quiet, but it has never been weak. Now, with every discovery, every translation, every young voice learning the old words, the flame grows brighter. In 2018, scientists used LiDAR, laser technology that maps terrain beneath forest canopies, to reveal more than 60,000 hidden structures in northern Guatemala. The data stunned the world. The Maya civilization, it turned out, was far larger and more interconnected than anyone had imagined. A network of cities, causeways, terraces, and canals stretching across thousands of square kilometers. The revelation didn't surprise the descendants. "We always knew," one elder said simply. "The earth remembers us. It was never a lost world. It was just waiting for the world to listen." The modern Maya live at a crossroads of memory and future. Their children use smartphones to photograph rituals their grandparents once performed in secret. Their artists paint gods of maize and rain on concrete walls. Their poets write in Quiché, blending ancient imagery with modern ache. Their scientists study climate, carrying forward the same obsession with rain and season that shaped their ancestors' fate. And through it all, a question lingers, one that bridges centuries. Can the world finally learn from them? The Maya believed time was alive, cyclical, breathing, eternal. Our world, obsessed with speed and progress, treats time as something to conquer. But perhaps, if we listen, their wisdom still has the power to change us. Because in their story lies the oldest truth of all, that life is a balance, not a race. That every act of creation must honor what came before. That every civilization, no matter how advanced, is just one cycle in a greater rhythm. The Maya fell, yes, but in falling, they taught us how to rise. Their cities crumble, but their spirit rebuilds itself in every sunrise, every storm, every word spoken in their languages.
And maybe that's why, when you stand in the shadow of a Maya temple today, you can feel something under your skin. A vibration, faint but steady, like the echo of a drum that never stopped beating. It's not the past calling, it's continuity. The Maya world didn't end, it evolved. And as the modern world grapples with its own imbalance, climate shifts, lost cultures, forgotten wisdom, maybe it's the Maya who will teach us how to survive again, not through conquest, but through understanding. Because they never stopped believing that every ending, no matter how dark, is only the beginning of another dawn. The night sky above the Yucatan has always been the same. Long before telescopes, before equations, before satellites, the Maya stood beneath it and listened. To them, the sky was not a void, but a song, a living pattern of rhythm and return. Every planet, every star, every eclipse was a word in the language of eternity. Even now, if you stand at the top of a Maya temple, say at Copan, Uxmal, or Chichen Itza, and look up, you see what they saw, the same rivers of light, the same wheeling constellations, the slow pulse of Venus rising before dawn. But they did not merely admire the sky, they understood it. The Maya were among the finest astronomers of the ancient world. Their priests tracked celestial movements not with metal or glass, but with patience. Night after night, generation after generation, they recorded the heavens, building tables of cycles so precise that even modern computers have confirmed their accuracy. They knew the solar year was 365.242 days. They tracked the lunar month to within seconds. They mapped eclipses, conjunctions, and the complex path of Venus with a precision unmatched until the invention of the telescope. And they did all this not to dominate the heavens, but to live in harmony with them. To the Maya, astronomy was theology. The sky was the face of the gods, the stars their breath, the planets their footsteps. To watch the heavens was to participate in creation itself. Their cities were built as calendars. In Uxmal, the Pyramid of the Magician rises at an angle that aligns perfectly with the setting sun during the summer solstice. At Chichen Itza, the shadow of the feathered serpent slides down El Castillo's staircase at the equinox, a spectacle of geometry, faith, and light. In Copan, the ball courts and stelae are placed along precise celestial axes, each corner pointing toward a moment in the heavens. It was not coincidence, it was choreography, stone moving in rhythm with the sky. They believed the gods had given humanity one sacred duty: to keep time. Every ritual, every harvest, every war and coronation had to occur in cosmic alignment. Time was not linear, but sacred motion. To live correctly was to move with that motion. Their astronomers were not scientists in our sense. They were priests, keepers of balance, translators between heaven and earth. When they studied the planets, they were not predicting, they were listening. Modern science, for all its precision, sometimes forgets that listening is also a kind of knowing. Yet now, centuries later, the stars are speaking again, and we are listening differently, but to the same song. In a laboratory at the University of Texas, a group of astrophysicists works on modeling planetary orbits using computer simulations. On one wall hangs a reproduction of the Dresden Codex, one of the 4 surviving Maya books. It's open to the Venus table, a series of glyphs, numbers, and dots that chart the cycles of Venus over 584 days. The lead researcher smiles when visitors ask why it's there. Because, she says, these numbers still work. Indeed, they do. When her team compared their models to the Codex, they found that the Maya calculations for Venus's visibility periods, its risings and settings, were accurate to within a single day, over a span of centuries,
Think about that. With no telescopes, no metal instruments, no written algebra, they achieved mathematical precision that rivals modern data. But perhaps what's even more astonishing is why they did it. The Maya didn't observe Venus for curiosity or power. They did it to understand when to plant, when to pray, when to rest. The planet's brightness, its moments of invisibility, its return, all carried moral and agricultural meaning. Venus was the twin of the sun, the wanderer, the warrior. Its path mirrored the cycles of life itself. They saw in the heavens not distance, but kinship. Today, we send spacecraft to other worlds. We photograph galaxies billions of light years away, and yet we struggle to feel that same kinship. We have data, but not intimacy. The Maya remind us that knowledge without reverence is incomplete. At the ruins of Palenque, archaeologists uncovered an inscription describing an event that would occur thousands of years after the city was abandoned, a date so far in the future that it lands in what we call the year 4772. Why would they carve a prediction so distant? Because they believed time has no edge. The future is as real as the past. To mark a date was to acknowledge that existence continues beyond the fall of cities, beyond kings, beyond memory. That, in its quiet way, was the Maya's greatest act of faith. They built monuments not just for their children, but for ours. And indeed, in the 21st century, those monuments have begun to speak again, not through priests, but through technology. Satellites now orbit over the jungles they once called home. Their sensors pierce the canopy, revealing the hidden architecture of a civilization that never stopped breathing. Digital archaeologists trace invisible roads, terraces, and water systems, discovering that the Maya had engineered their world like a living organism. They managed forests, rotated crops, diverted rivers, not randomly, but in harmony with the heavens. When the constellations shifted, they adjusted their fields. Their architecture mirrored the cosmos. Theirs was a science of belonging. In recent years, climate scientists have begun to revisit the Maya world not as a tragedy, but as a teacher. They study how the Maya managed drought-resistant agriculture, how they built reservoirs that lasted through dry decades, how their understanding of ecological balance could guide modern sustainability. We once called their collapse a warning. Now, we might call it a lesson in resilience. The Maya didn't fail because they misunderstood the world. They failed because they trusted it too deeply, believed the balance would hold forever. But even in their fall, they left us a map of how to live with the earth, not above it. That map is written in stars and soil, temples and equations. And as we rediscover it, we rediscover something of ourselves. Because the truth is, we are all descendants of skywatchers. The same curiosity that drove the Maya priests to trace Venus across the dawn drives our scientists to scan the cosmos for exoplanets. The same reverence for cycles that shaped their rituals shapes our search for rhythm in the laws of physics. We look up for answers because the heavens have always been our oldest mirror. And in that mirror, the Maya saw not gods in thrones of fire, but reflections of their own souls, mortal and divine, fleeting and eternal. When astronauts aboard the International Space Station photograph the Yucatan Peninsula, they sometimes notice the faint geometric outlines of ancient cities beneath the green. The roads, the plazas, the reservoirs, still there, just hidden. From orbit, the past looks like a constellation drawn on the Earth. And maybe that's the truest image of the Maya legacy, a constellation that never fades, even when its stars go dark. Their civilization collapsed, yes, but their understanding of time, balance, and the cosmos remains one of humanity's greatest inheritances. In their world, to study the stars was to remember who we are, to know when to sow and when to rest, when to fight and when to yield, when to end and when to begin again. They did not believe they owned the sky. They believed they belonged to it. And perhaps that is the secret we have lost, and the one we must learn again. Because the stars remember us. They have watched every rise, every fall. They have seen every empire reach upward and then dissolve into silence. And still they wait, patient as ever, for us to look up and listen once more. In the ancient world, few things were as mysterious as numbers. They were invisible, yet absolute, a language that could describe the stars, the seasons, even the will of the gods. For the Maya, mathematics was not invented, it was revealed. They believed numbers were alive, each with its own personality, its own divine resonance. Counting was a sacred act, a way of participating in the rhythm of creation. Every sum, every cycle, every calculation was a conversation with the cosmos. Their system was breathtakingly simple, yet profoundly powerful. It was vigimaginal, based on the number 20. 10 fingers, 10 toes, one whole human. To them, 20 was the measure of completeness, the unit of life itself. Their symbols were elegant: a dot for 1, a bar for 5, and a shell for 0. That shell, the empty oval, the quiet curve, was one of the most extraordinary symbols in all of human history. Because long before Europe understood the concept of 0, the Maya had already given it meaning. To them, 0 was not emptiness, it was potential. In their glyphs, 0 often appeared as a seashell, the womb of creation, the pause before sound, the breath before birth. It represented the end of one cycle and the promise of the next. 0 wasn't nothing, it was everything waiting to happen. Imagine how revolutionary that is. In a world where most ancient cultures feared void and absence, the Maya embraced it as sacred. They didn't see time as a line running from beginning to end. They saw it as a circle, breathing in and out. And at the heart of that circle sat 0, the still point that made motion possible. Their mathematics wasn't just theoretical. It was cosmic architecture. With dots, bars, and shells, the Maya built calendars of staggering precision. Their long count system could measure spans of time longer than recorded history itself. They tracked millions of days with accuracy that remains awe-inspiring even today. But unlike our modern numbers, which exist in isolation, Maya numbers always existed in relation. They were part of a living network: the calendar, the heavens, the harvest, the body, the soul. Take, for example, the number 13. In Maya cosmology, 13 was sacred, the number of heavens above the earth. They believed the universe was layered: 13 heavens above, 9 underworlds below, and our world balanced between them. Every act of life, every prayer, every ritual, every journey moved within that sacred geometry. 13 also governed the Tzolkin, the 260-day ritual calendar. 20 day signs multiplied by 13 numbers created a repeating cycle, a sacred heartbeat that guided destiny. When a child was born, the priest would consult the calendar, reading the day sign and the number as twin spirits shaping that person's fate. To be born under 4 Aha, for example, meant to carry the strength of the sun and the duty of leadership. To be born under 13 Ix, the spirit of jaguar and mystery. Numbers were not cold abstractions, they were living forces. Even their architecture was numerical poetry. At Chichen Itza, the Pyramid of Kukulkan has 91 steps on each of its 4 sides. Add the top platform and you have 365, the solar year. The building itself is a calendar made of stone. Each equinox, light and shadow create the image of a serpent descending the steps, a mathematical miracle turned into a ritual of light.
Every temple, every stela, every inscription reflected this same harmony, as if the entire civilization were built to remind the gods that humans still remembered the rhythm of creation. But the deeper beauty of Maya mathematics lies not in its accuracy, but in its humility. To them, knowledge was not about control, it was about balance. The priest mathematicians, known as Akin, those who keep the days, saw themselves not as masters of numbers, but as caretakers.
They did not invent time, they maintained it. Their duty was to keep the cosmic gears turning smoothly through ritual, observation, and calculation. Their records were astonishing. The Dresden Codex, one of the few surviving Maya books, contains tables of lunar eclipses spanning centuries. Scholars who studied it found that its predictions match modern astronomical calculations with uncanny precision. But the Codex is not just a chart, it is a prayer written in arithmetic. Each column of numbers is framed by gods, each equation an offering to balance heaven and earth. Numbers were sacred speech, and silence was part of that speech. When the Maya drew the shell for zero, they weren't writing a void. They were acknowledging the divine pause between breaths, between worlds. They understood what modern physics would one day confirm, that emptiness is never empty. It is full of possibility. Even their mythology reflects this truth. In the Popol Vuh, creation begins not with chaos, but with stillness. Everything was silent and calm, the text says. The sky alone was there. The earth had not yet awakened. Out of that stillness, the gods spoke. Their words became numbers. The numbers became days, and the days became us. To count, then, was to participate in creation again and again. Modern mathematicians often describe zero as an invention, a human tool that makes calculation possible. But for the Maya, it was a revelation. It came not from reason, but from reverence. In a sense, the Maya invented not just zero, but patience. The ability to see meaning in waiting, value in cycles, beauty in endings. That philosophy of balance and recurrence shaped every part of their world. When the droughts came, they did not see it as failure, but as part of the cycle. When kingdoms fell, they did not see collapse, but renewal. When death arrived, they saw not loss, but transformation. And at the center of it all, zero. It is strange how modern civilization, for all its complexity, has forgotten that simplicity. We think of numbers as tools to measure growth, wealth, progress. The Maya thought of them as ways to measure harmony. They believed the universe itself was built on mathematics, but not the kind we use to dominate nature, the kind that helps us live within it. Even today, their descendants keep this mathematical faith alive in subtle ways. In weaving, patterns of dots and lines echo the ancient system, designs passed down through generations. In rituals, the count of candles, steps, and offerings still follows the old numerology. 13, 9, 20. Sacred measures of the unseen. When a Maya priest lights candles before dawn, he arranges them in precise shapes, murmuring the day's number and sign. It is both a prayer and a calculation, a conversation with time itself. The same hands that count grains of maize also count stars. The same rhythms that mark harvests mark eclipses. That unity between sky and soil, spirit and number, may be the Maya's greatest gift to us, because it reminds us that knowledge and wisdom are not the same. We know more than they ever did, yet we understand less. They could predict eclipses, yes, but they also knew why it mattered. They saw in every shadow and every cycle the reflection of their own impermanence. Their mathematics was not just a way to measure life, it was a way to live it. And perhaps that is what makes their story timeless. They built a science of meaning, a world where the universe wasn't just observed but loved. When we look at their numbers today, the dots, bars, and shells carved into stone, we are not looking at data, we are looking at devotion. And maybe, if we listen closely, we can still hear what those numbers are saying. Not formulas, not equations, but a whisper. Everything returns. In the ancient world, few things were as mysterious as numbers. They were invisible, yet absolute, a language that could describe the stars, the seasons, even the will of the gods. For the Maya, mathematics was not invented, it was revealed. They believed numbers were alive, each with its own personality, its own divine resonance. Counting was a sacred act, a way of participating in the rhythm of creation. Every sum, every cycle, every calculation was a conversation with the cosmos. Their system was breathtakingly simple, yet profoundly powerful. It was vigesimal, based on the number 20. 10 fingers, 10 toes, one whole human. To them, 20 was the measure of completeness, the unit of life itself. Their symbols were elegant, a dot for 1, a bar for 5, and a shell for 0. That shell, the empty oval, the quiet curve, was one of the most extraordinary symbols in all of human history. Because long before Europe understood the concept of 0, the Maya had already given it meaning. To them, 0 was not emptiness, it was potential. In their glyphs, 0 often appeared as a seashell, the womb of creation, the pause before sound, the breath before birth. It represented the end of one cycle and the promise of the next. 0 wasn't nothing. It was everything waiting to happen. Imagine how revolutionary that is. In a world where most ancient cultures feared void and absence, the Maya embraced it as sacred. They didn't see time as a line running from beginning to end. They saw it as a circle breathing in and out. And at the heart of that circle sat 0, the still point that made motion possible. Their mathematics wasn't just theoretical, it was cosmic architecture. With dots, bars, and shells, the Maya built calendars of staggering precision. Their long count system could measure spans of time longer than recorded history itself. They tracked millions of days with accuracy that remains awe-inspiring even today. But unlike our modern numbers, which exist in isolation, Maya numbers always existed in relation. They were part of a living network. The calendar, the heavens, the harvest, the body, the soul. Take, for example, the number 13. In Maya cosmology, 13 was sacred, the number of heavens above the earth. They believed the universe was layered, 13 heavens above, 9 underworlds below, and our world balanced between them. Every act of life, every prayer, every ritual, every journey moved within that sacred geometry. 13 also governed the Tzolk'in, the 260-day ritual calendar. 20 day signs multiplied by 13 numbers created a repeating cycle, a sacred heartbeat that guided destiny. When a child was born, the priest would consult the calendar, reading the day sign and the number as twin spirits shaping that person's fate. To be born under 4 Ajah, for example, meant to carry the strength of the sun and the duty of leadership. To be born under 13 Ix, the spirit of jaguar and mystery. Numbers were not cold abstractions, they were living forces. Even their architecture was numerical poetry. At Chichen Itza, the Pyramid of Kukulkan has 91 steps on each of its 4 sides. Add the top platform and you have 365, the solar year. The building itself is a calendar made of stone. Each equinox, light and shadow create the image of a serpent descending the steps, a mathematical miracle turned into a ritual of light. Every temple, every stela, every inscription reflected this same harmony, as if the entire civilization were built to remind the gods that humans still remembered the rhythm of creation. But the deeper beauty of Maya mathematics lies not in its accuracy, but in its humility. To them, knowledge was not about control, it was about balance. The priest mathematicians, known as Akin, those who keep the days, saw themselves not as masters of numbers, but as caretakers. They did not invent time, they maintained it. Their duty was to keep the cosmic gears turning smoothly through ritual, observation, and calculation. Their records were astonishing. The Dresden Codex, one of the few surviving Maya books, contains tables of lunar eclipses spanning centuries. Scholars who studied it found that its predictions match modern astronomical calculations with uncanny precision. But the Codex is not just a chart. It is a prayer written in arithmetic. Each column of numbers is framed by gods, each equation an offering to balance heaven and earth. Numbers were sacred speech, and silence was part of that speech. When the Maya drew the shell for zero, they weren't writing a void. They were acknowledging the divine pause between breaths, between worlds. They understood what modern physics would one day confirm, that emptiness is never empty. It is full of possibility. Even their mythology reflects this truth. In the Popol Vuh, creation begins not with chaos, but with stillness. Everything was silent and calm, the text says. The sky alone was there. The earth had not yet awakened. Out of that stillness, the gods spoke. Their words became numbers, the numbers became days, and the days became us. To count, then, was to participate in creation again and again. Modern mathematicians often describe zero as an invention, a human tool that makes calculation possible. But for the Maya, it was a revelation. It came not from reason, but from reverence. In a sense, the Maya invented not just zero, but patience, the ability to see meaning in waiting, value in cycles, beauty in endings. That philosophy of balance and recurrence shaped every part of their world. When the droughts came, they did not see it as failure, but as part of the cycle. When kingdoms fell, they did not see collapse, but renewal. When death arrived, they saw not loss, but transformation. And at the center of it all, zero. It is strange how modern civilization, for all its complexity, has forgotten that simplicity. We think of numbers as tools to measure growth, wealth, progress. The Maya thought of them as ways to measure harmony. They believed the universe itself was built on mathematics, but not the kind we use to dominate nature, the kind that helps us live within it. Even today, their descendants keep this mathematical faith alive in subtle ways. In weaving, patterns of dots and lines echo the ancient system, designs passed down through generations. In rituals, the count of candles, steps, and offerings still follows the old numerology: 13, 9, 20, sacred measures of the unseen. When a Maya priest lights candles before dawn, he arranges them in precise shapes, murmuring the day's number and sign. It is both a prayer and a calculation, a conversation with time itself. The same hands that count grains of maize also count stars. The same rhythms that mark harvests mark eclipses. That unity between sky and soil, spirit and number, may be the Maya's greatest gift to us, because it reminds us that knowledge and wisdom are not the same. We know more than they ever did, yet we understand less. They could predict eclipses, yes, but they also knew why it mattered. They saw in every shadow and every cycle the reflection of their own impermanence. Their mathematics was not just a way to measure life, it was a way to live it. And perhaps that is what makes their story timeless. They built a science of meaning, a world where the universe wasn't just observed, but loved. When we look at their numbers today, the dots, bars, and shells carved into stone, we are not looking at data. We are looking at devotion. And maybe, if we listen closely, we can still hear what those numbers are saying. Not formulas, not equations, but a whisper. Everything returns. There is a kind of silence that only ancient places can make, not the silence of absence, but the silence of memory. When you stand among the ruins of a Maya city, that silence is alive. It breathes. It hums softly beneath the sound of the wind, beneath the cries of birds that nest in broken walls. It is as if the stones themselves are dreaming. At dawn, the mist moves through the temples like a slow tide. The air smells of wet earth and time. The jungle around you stirs, not waking, but remembering. This is where the Maya speak now, not in words, but in architecture, in shadow, in the way light touches limestone at a certain hour. Their stories are etched not on paper, but into the geometry of the world. Every stone in a Maya city was placed with intention. Every angle, every alignment, every stair and carving served a purpose, mathematical, spiritual, human. Even in ruin, that precision endures. If you climb the worn steps of Temple 4 at Tikal, the world opens around you. The forest stretches to the horizon, green and infinite. You can see the tops of other temples rising from the canopy, like islands in an emerald sea. Between them lies an ocean of trees, vast, quiet, and eternal. You realize, standing there, that you are not above the jungle, you are within it. The temples are not intrusions upon nature, they are part of it. The Maya did not build to conquer the earth, they built to echo it. Each temple was a dialogue, a conversation between heaven and soil. The builders aligned them to the solstice, to Venus, to the cardinal directions, so that every dawn and dusk became a reenactment of creation. When the sun rises through the doorway of a temple, it does so by design. When a shadow falls perfectly along a staircase, it is not accident, it is language. Light is the ink, stone is the page. And the message is simple, but infinite. Everything is connected. The Maya didn't believe in permanence, they believed in participation. To carve a stone, to raise a wall, to build a temple was to join the dance of the cosmos, to make the human world resonate with the divine one. That is why, even in ruin, these cities feel alive. They are not monuments to what has ended, but reminders of what continues. When the archaeologists first arrived, men in hats and boots, armed with notebooks and cameras, they described the ruins as lost cities. But nothing here was lost. It had merely become quiet. The jungle didn't destroy the Maya cities, it protected them. It wrapped them in green arms, guarded them from rain and time, hid them from conquest. For centuries, while the world changed, the temples waited. And when the explorers finally cut through the vines and stood before those vast pyramids again, the earth exhaled. The cities had been dreaming of light. Each temple, when revealed, was more than architecture. It was a revelation. The carvings still held their shape. The glyphs still whispered names of kings, queens, gods, and heroes. The stelae, tall stone monuments inscribed with history, still stood like sentinels. Some had fallen, some had cracked, but the stories were intact. Even after 1,000 years of rain, the stones still spoke. They spoke of wars fought and won, of gods appeased and angered, of children born under auspicious stars. They spoke of time counted not in years, but in breaths, the sacred cycles of Khatuns and Bakhtuns, time as heartbeat, not horizon. And perhaps most beautifully, they spoke of humility, because carved into these stones is not the arrogance of eternity, but the acceptance of impermanence. One inscription from Palenque reads, "Here lies Kinich Janaab Pakal, who went into the sky, who will return when time is right." It's not an epitaph, it's a promise. The Maya didn't carve their names to be remembered, they carved them to be found. And when we find them, when we run our fingers along those weathered symbols, we become part of that promise. We become the continuation. The stones remember us too. They have felt the touch of every human who ever believed in something larger than themselves. The priests lighting incense, the architects measuring shadows, the farmers praying for rain, and now us. We, the modern wanderers, come with cameras and curiosity, trying to read their silence. But the truth is, the Maya were never trying to speak to us. They were speaking to time. And time, patient, circular, forgiving, has finally carried their words back to our ears. When the light hits a temple wall just so, the carvings shimmer faintly. The faces of gods and kings seem to breathe again. It's as if the stones are exhaling stories. You feel it, not in your ears, but in your chest, a resonance, a hum that says, you are standing where the world has always begun. That's what the ruins are, places where beginnings and endings meet. The Maya never separated the physical from the spiritual, the scientific from the sacred. To them, a wall was a prayer, a staircase was a hymn, a city was an act of devotion. And when their civilization fell, the devotion remained. Even now, the descendants of the Maya return to these temples not as tourists, but as pilgrims. They bring offerings, candles, flowers, food. They kneel in the shadow of stones their ancestors raised. They speak the old prayers, light the old fires. They are not resurrecting a dead religion. They are maintaining a living relationship. Because to them, these ruins are not relics, they are relatives. A priest at Copan once said, "We do not pray to the temples, we pray with them." That difference holds everything. It means the past is not gone, it is participating. The stones are not observers, they are witnesses. And the ruins are not haunted by ghosts, they are inhabited by memory. In the stillness between those ancient walls, you begin to understand what the Maya rue, that silence is not emptiness, it is fullness too vast for words. Each whisper of wind through the ruins carries centuries of human breath, of laughter, grief, worship, and wonder. If you listen carefully, the jungle itself joins in. The cicadas buzz in waves like chants. The leaves rustle in rhythms that echo distant drums. Even the rain, when it falls, sounds like applause for the earth. You start to realize that the Maya did not vanish. They became part of this sound. Their language turned into birdsong, their architecture into mountains, their prayers into weather. They merged with the world they worshipped, and that, perhaps, was the point all along. They built not to defy time, but to speak its language. Now, as archaeologists map their cities with satellites and drones, as historians decode their glyphs with computers, the stones still whisper the same simple truth. We were never lost. You just stopped listening. And maybe, finally, we're beginning to listen again. Because standing in front of a Maya temple at dusk, as the sky bleeds into gold, as the jungle exhales, as bats begin to circle the towers, you feel something ancient stirring beneath your feet. It's not nostalgia, it's recognition. You feel that the stones know you, that they have been waiting for you. Not you, the individual, but you, the human. The one who still looks up at the stars and wonders. The one who still builds, still prays, still searches for meaning in the movement of light. And in that moment, you understand. The stones have never stopped whispering. We simply forgot how to be quiet enough to hear them. The jungle is quiet again. It always ends like this, not with thunder, not with collapse, but with stillness. The air hums softly, heavy with the scent of rain. The temples stand in half-light, their edges softened by moss and time. Somewhere in the canopy, a single bird calls, and the echo rolls across centuries. It could be today. It could be 1,000 years ago. Because here, time is not something that passes. It circles. That is the secret the Maya understood better than anyone. Not that civilizations rise and fall, but that everything, every life, every star, every breath moves in rhythm. They carved that rhythm into stone, into calendars, into their very faith. And now, as the last rays of the sun fade across the jungle, you can feel it. The pulse that connects everything that has ever lived. The story of the Maya is not the story of disappearance. It is the story of return. We began this journey with a mystery. How could a civilization so advanced, so brilliant, vanish overnight?
Now we know the truth. They never did. The Maya did not vanish. They changed form. They stepped into the forest, into the rain, into the generations that came after. Their temples became hills, their roads became roots, their voices became wind. Collapse was never the end, it was continuation. To the Maya, every ending was sacred, a necessary silence before the next creation. When a fire burned out, they didn't mourn the ashes, they gathered them, mixed them with clay, and built again. Perhaps that is why their legacy still feels alive, because it was never meant to be finished. It was meant to breathe. In the ruins of Palenque, a carving shows a god emerging from the jaws of a serpent. His expression is calm, almost serene. To Western eyes, it looks like rebirth. To the Maya, it was something deeper, the acknowledgement that life and death are the same motion, seen from two sides. Every civilization believes it is the one that will last. The Maya knew better. They knew that eternity doesn't belong to empires, it belongs to balance. That is the lesson hidden in their fall. When the droughts came, when the rivers shrank and the gods grew silent, the Maya didn't fail because they were foolish. They failed because they were human. They built too much, trusted too deeply, reached too high. They pushed the balance until it broke, and then, in the only way they knew, they let it go. The jungle reclaimed them. The earth took back its breath. And in that surrender, there was wisdom. We, the inheritors of endless progress, rarely think of surrender as wisdom. We call it defeat.
But the Maya remind us that surrender is sometimes the only way to live in rhythm with a world larger than ourselves. They believed the gods lived in the rain, the maize, the stars, not above creation, but within it. And when they prayed, they didn't ask for dominance, they asked for harmony. That harmony is what we have forgotten. We live in a time of noise, cities that never sleep, lights that drown out the stars, a world that mistakes speed for meaning. We measure success by growth, not by balance. We speak of saving the planet as if we were something separate from it. The Maya never made that mistake. They knew they were not apart from the earth, they were its echo. Every act of life, planting, carving, praying, dying, was an act of alignment. Every human was a thread in the cosmic fabric, and when one thread frayed, the pattern shifted. They didn't build monuments to outlast time. They built monuments to belong to it. And maybe that's why their temples still stand. Because they were not built against the world, they were built with it. The limestone that forms their pyramids was once sea coral, once wave and light. It still carries that memory. Even as the jungle devours it, it remains part of the earth's breathing body. When you run your hand over a Maya carving, you are touching the ocean, the sun, the rain, all condensed into stone. And perhaps, if you are quiet enough, you can feel your own heartbeat align with the rhythm of the world. Because that is what the Maya left us, not just knowledge, but cadence. Not just monuments, but music. Their story is not a warning. It is a mirror. It shows us what happens when we forget the balance between creation and consumption, between reverence and ambition. But it also shows us how to find it again, through listening, patience, and humility. They taught that when you lose the path, you do not build a new one. You stop, you listen, and the earth will speak. The Maya listened. That is why their cities were aligned with the stars. That is why their numbers matched the cycles of the moon. That is why even their silence feels like meaning. When they fell, they did not vanish into darkness. They became part of the rhythm that continues to sustain the world. Their descendants still keep that rhythm. They plant maize as their ancestors did, marking the days by the sacred calendar. They tell stories by firelight, not of the past, but of continuation. One elder once said, "The ruins are not our ancestors' tombs. They are their mouths. They are still speaking." And when you think about it, maybe the same is true for every civilization. Maybe the ruins we leave behind, the cities, the art, the words, are not graves, but conversations, waiting for someone to listen. We often fear the idea of collapse, but to the Maya, collapse was not catastrophe. It was breath. It was the exhale that made room for the next inhale of creation. Their entire worldview can be summed up in one truth. Everything returns. The rain returns, the sun returns, the people return, the gods return, and someday so will we. The Maya didn't need to be remembered because they never really left. Their mathematics lives in our computers. Their astronomy lives in our calendars. Their philosophy lives in our growing awareness that balance is not optional, it is destiny. They are the ancestors not just of a people, but of a perspective. One that sees the divine not in heaven, but in the breath between moments. So when you stand in the shadow of their temples, don't ask how they disappeared. Ask what they became. Because the truth is, we are all part of the same cycle. We rise, we fall, we build, we fade. And if we are lucky, we learn, as the Maya did, that what matters is not how long we last, but how well we listen. The last sound you hear in the jungle is not silence. It is the hum of continuity, the slow turning of the world, the pulse of rain, the whisper of stone. And if you close your eyes, you can almost hear the words they left behind, carved into the air. Do not fear the ending. The gods have simply turned the page. That is the end of our story, or perhaps just another beginning. Thank you for walking through time with me, through rain and ruin, through faith and silence, through the breath of a civilization that never truly died. If you enjoyed this journey, please remember to stay with us, subscribe, and keep listening, because history never really ends. It only changes its rhythm. And somewhere, beneath the trees of the old world, the drums of the Maya are still beating, patient, soft, eternal.